Have fun, everyone. Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome. On behalf of ForSpace, welcome to INDI Research Day. A warm welcome to the graduate students participating in this video competition and to the audience members who are joining us now. I'll pass it over to our moderator shortly, but first, for those of you unfamiliar with Concordia's ForSpace, we are physically located on unceded Indigenous land in downtown Jojage, Montreal, and we operate as a university-wide platform to activate research, teaching, and initiatives, and basically to connect the public with the inner workings of a university in terms of the various ideas, projects, and cross-disciplinary ventures brewing inside of labs, studios, and classrooms. It's therefore our pleasure to take part in this exciting event. We are recording and streaming this event right now, so I'll pop those links into the chat in a minute. You're welcome to share on your own pages if you choose to do so. There will be recorded videos that you'll be viewing today, and those will be followed by question periods. And during those question periods, we're in the webinar setting. We've activated the Q&A for you to pop those questions in there if you're more of a texter. But you're also welcome to raise your virtual hand and we will sweep in, unmute you, and allow you to join in the conversation that way. It is now my pleasure to pass proceedings over to INDI Director Rachel Berger. Over to you, Rachel.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. We're so excited we could do it this year. I think last year, INDI Research Day was scheduled for something like March 20th, and it was the conversations about what will happen with INDI Research Day that made the reality of the pandemic feel very, very real to those of us in the INDI office. And so I'm really happy that we could manage to put together something really amazing this year. For those of you who don't know much about our program, we're the only PhD and MA program at Concordia that incorporates students from all of the 4 faculties. We're thoroughly interdisciplinary, and I'm really excited about the videos today because they really show the breadth of the kind of research that our students undertake. So they will speak for themselves. And I think I'm just going to tell you a little bit about some of the other people who are here. So this is a judged competition, and we have with us Professor Peter Pawlik. Wave, Peter. He's a professor of chemistry and the Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Postdoctoral Studies in SGS, along with MJ Thompson, who's the Associate Dean of Research at the Faculty of Fine Arts, and Kathleen Bois, who's the Associate Dean of Research and Research Programs at JMSB. The 3 of them will be the judges for the competition today. And the things that they're looking for in terms of judging the videos are, number 1, communication skills, number 2, content quality, and number 3, the presentation and the quality of the video. So here's how we're all going to roll out the day. We'll begin, we'll group the videos into groups of 3. Emily Leavitt, an MA in our program, will be introducing the panelists. We'll introduce the panelists, we'll go on to show their video, we'll do that 3 times, and then we'll take a little bit of a pause. While the videos are being watched, please throw your questions up into the Q&A or raise your hand in the chat. And then after each set of videos, we'll be doing a little Q&A with each of the panelists. We'll move on to our second and then our third group. And when we've seen all of the videos, we'll take a little pause don't-take for 5 minutes, take a breath, get a drop of water, and we'll come back to announce the winners and have a chat with all of the panelists. So without further ado, Emily, I turn it over to you.
All right, thanks so much. And thank you everyone for being here. So I'm going to introduce the first group. We kind of grouped everyone based on central themes of the projects being presented. So first up, we have a group that's focused in humanities, culture, and society. The first participant I'll be introducing is Tatiana Zanon. Tatiana is a PhD candidate at the Center for Engineering and Society at Concordia University. Her research, supervised by Dr. Tanya Tajmel, addresses othering and marginalization of women and visible minorities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So without further ado, her video.
When you think about a scientist, what image comes to your mind? Probably something like this. Well, this image of scientists that you and a lot of people have in mind is not by chance. Actually, I was searching famous scientists on Google and take a look at the results that were shown to me. This image of scientists as a white middle-aged man is incredibly popular, not only on the internet, but also in different media vehicles, in movies and TV shows, and in science textbooks. Take a look at our first results about to be published. We analyzed over 450 depictions in 4 Canadian science textbooks, and among all famous scientists, almost 70% were men and 100% were white. But how are these friendly images of scientists work as exclusion mechanisms for those who do not correspond to them? How are science textbooks decreasing scientific diversity and increasing inequalities? How might they be contributing to the marginalization of particular groups in science? These are some of the questions that I'll try to answer in my research. But why textbooks? Well, science textbooks are a big deal, and both teachers and students spend almost full time using them. So they shape what is science and who can be a scientist. Wait a minute. Science is neutral and objective. There are no values, personal beliefs, or any influence in how it's presented. And this is precisely one of the main goals of my research, to show that this isn't true. Like any other human enterprise, science is surrounded by social and cultural values that embrace some profiles and intentionally exclude others. As I said, it's not by chance that all scientists that you see have the same look. The social impacts of this lack of diverse representation make, for example, a lot of students giving up on science careers, and hence resulting in a huge economic impact too. Using critical tools and interdisciplinary lens, I'll analyze Canadian and Brazilian science textbooks. And why Canada and Brazil? Because these countries, despite their differences, have a lot of things in common. So I want to analyze if their science textbooks are equally reproducing or not a biased and monolithical portrayal of science. And together, I'll propose a more diverse and motivating way to present science on them. So everyone, no matter how different from Einstein they look, can see themselves and actively participate in the scientific world. My name is Tatiana Zanon, and this is my PhD research.
Hi, folks. Stranger things have happened. It's snowing in the middle of April, and we've got to restart those videos because of a little bit behind the scenes tech issue. It'll just take 1 second. We really appreciate your patience. We're going to get going again. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay, Emily, we're ready to go again. Thanks for your patience.
Yes, so this next video is the video that I presented myself. So Darlene, our INDI coordinator, is going to introduce this video.
Hello there. Our second participant is Emily Leavitt, is a first-year master's student pursuing linguistic research focused on Quebec French, language variation and change, and multilingualism under the direction of her supervisor, Davy Bigot. Emily's research on the linguistic practices of Quebec rap artists began during her undergraduate career with a project which has since been published in the Midwestern Journal of Undergraduate Research and has been continued within the scope of linguistic conference presentations, one given last month at the Journée de Linguistique hosted by the Université de Laval, and one to be given next month at the Colloque Études Françaises de la Côte Pacifique hosted by the University of British Columbia.
My name is Emily Leavitt, and I'm here to talk to you today about the master's research I'm conducting within Concordia University's interdisciplinary program in the field of linguistics. Thinking of your own experience, when has someone's way of speaking deviated from standard everyday language, and in so doing offered clues about their social identity? This type of deviation can be referred to as variation, and the relationships between language variation and a speaker's social characteristics are the object of study in both variationist sociolinguistics and in my own research. By studying the links between speakers' choices of variance and their social traits, we can gain insight into the social value associated with certain variance on a continuum between two poles. On one side, variance of prestige, and on the other, variance marked by a lack of social valuation. If we add the parameter of time to this study, we can understand if and how the social value held by certain language variance changes over time. Previous research has revealed abundant evidence pointing to pre-adolescent and adolescent youth as innovators of typical linguistic change. As these youth increase in age, they carry innovative variance into their adult social networks and thus act as agents of linguistic change. Therefore, the study of what impacts youth language innovation becomes critical in understanding what incites such change and innovation. In my own research, I focus on the language choices diffused to youth audiences by the Quebec rap music industry. As a genre popular among youth and which demands deeply creative lyrical practices, rap music and culture stand out as potential breeding grounds for linguistic innovation. One particular linguistic phenomenon features the alternation between two languages, referred to as code switching, and is a feature I have discovered to be heavily integrated into Quebec rap lyricism. In addition to code switching and other phenomena related to multilingualism, I have also found evidence that the Quebec rap community adheres to its own set of language norms separate from that of the larger Quebec society. Through my ongoing research, I aim to draw comparisons between these two sets of norms and to discover the precise social value of sound, vocabulary, and grammatical variance within the rap community. A better understanding of these language practices by artists celebrated within youth culture can allow for insight to be gained into which linguistic innovations will arise next in youth speech and ultimately evolve into linguistic changes within the wider Quebec community and determine the value of the language which we will speak in the future.
All right, so the third and final participant in this first group is Olivia McGilchrist. So Olivia's thesis research entitled Virtual Islands, Submersion and Hybrid Identity in Virtual Reality is supervised by Professors M.J. Thompson, Lynn Hughes, and Alice Ming Waijin. As a white French-Jamaican multimedia artist and doctoral candidate exploring how colonial legacies extend their reach to virtual reality technology, Olivia builds on personal experience as a white Euro-Caribbean and researches the portrayal of hybrid identity within contemporary Caribbean and other cultures, exploring how this can be represented in virtual reality.
My name is Olivia McGilchrist. I'm a multimedia artist, doctoral researcher, and educator from Europe and the Caribbean, currently based in Montreal. My PhD research creation project is entitled Virtual Islands, Submersion and Hybrid Identity in Virtual Reality, combining a written thesis and a virtual reality and video installation artwork, which ties together the relationship between Caribbean futures as an alternative to Western technofuturism and the possibility of submersion as a post-colonial stance within VR making practice.
Prompted by the question, what might a Caribbean future look like, by Dr. Marsha Pierce, my research creation project investigates VR as a decolonial tool through the notion of Caribbean futures. In this project, submersion as a post-colonial position within VR is a generative concept, since I am drawing from the submerged histories of the Middle Passage in the aftermath of transatlantic slavery, where much of the archive lies below the sea. My situated experience of cultural hybridity, being a white woman of mixed European and Caribbean heritage, is brought in relation through a virtual encounter with water and self-portraiture in VR. This project invites a reading of VR practices as aesthetic, artistic creation, foregrounding submersion over immersion in VR experiences. The Caribbean thinkers I engage with conceptualize the self as neither singular nor universal, creolized, hybrid, relational, but still specific. As a counter-argument to VR as an empathy machine, Edouard Glissant offers new possibilities for thinking through the self as interdependent, not entirely separable from those around us, without promising to ever completely inhabit the other, and in fact, resisting that impulse as colonial. This notion works well to counterbalance techno-utopist ideals of empathy, suggesting that yes, interpersonal and intercultural exchange is possible and even fundamental, but a notion of difference is still worth preserving. I argue that Kamau Brathwaite makes us rethink empathy by proposing alternate, fracted models of the self as grounded in a creolized Caribbean experience. His notion of dialectics is the most relevant theoretical framework for my project. For further information about my project, please contact me via email, direct message on the following platforms: Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Thank you for your time and your interest in my work.
So yes, hello everyone. Now we watched the first part of our videos, and now we are coming to the Q&A session. So we have in total around about 5 minutes time to ask some questions for the shown displayed videos. It could be some question regarding like the project itself, if you want to get to know something more in details, or it could be about the video itself. If you have some questions, what you can do now is you can type the question in the Q&A box. If you look down on your screen, there is like 2 speaking bubbles. There you can type in the questions. Anyways, if you would like to ask, or do you have something in mind during the videos, you can also type in the question while we are displaying the videos. And I will read the question afterwards loud to the entire audience. Another option is, if you want to ask like the question by yourself, you can raise your hand and go on the participants button, raise your hand, and then we can unmute you and you can ask your question by yourself. Otherwise, we are starting now. I've asked the first question, is very simple, is going to the first video. It is for Tatiana. So which country is more interested in adopting diversity in scientific textbooks? Was it Canada or is it Brazil? What do you think?
Actually, this is we are still analyzing the results, but so far, both countries, despite their differences in the national political agenda, they present science the same way. So under colonial perspectives. So pretty much the same so far.
Okay, thank you so much. Sure. Then there was a question for Olivia. And the question is the following: how do you mediate technology with nature in your work?
Thank you, Christiane. Is the word you used mediate? Was that
Yes.
Yeah. That's an excellent, fantastic question. I'm working on that. I think as my research began a few years ago now, the increase in climate change urgency levels globally, and particularly in regions which are most hit. So to cut it short, every year that goes by, the Caribbean region is hit violently more than once a year in some way or another by a climate crisis. So I would like to have the direct answer to your question. I think I will integrate nature very much artistically. I would love to also have a science brain and be able to bring in some data. I don't think this will happen within this PhD, unfortunately, but I'm following with a very curious mind what I could contribute as an artist in the conversation around the Anthropocene within a VR framework. So thanks for the question.
Yes, it sounds very interesting. Thank you and good luck. Another question for you, Olivia. What has been your experience researching as a Euro-Caribbean individual in Canada?
Thanks a lot, Emily. I appreciate your question, and I have many questions for you actually. I think what you said in your own presentation, and I suppose Tatiana, Emily, and myself, we seem to have similar, I can see why we're together. We're all asking, how does a different perspective offer something on, a given subject? And I think already having multiple identities or multiple places I call home, deciding to come in another place has only fostered more questions, which of course sometimes can be a little challenging, but is also forcing one to think from another perspective in most situations. So it's been very interesting, certainly being fully bilingual. I've been very fortunate to hear the same story from two different angles every time. And that has made me realize that in each situation, it's always better when you hear anything from more than one perspective. So thanks for the question again.
Thank you. So then we had a question. It's how are cultural groups using the French language differently in the rap scene? So for instance, Latino or white, etc.
Yes, that's a great question. Thanks so much, Jorge. So I'll first start by saying that all of these groups have the similar practice of using language mixing as a form of identity expression and performance, but the differences between the groups often involve the languages that they mix with French, which is typically the lingua franca within Quebec rap. So these groups would be, the Haitian community mixes Haitian Creole with French and English. The Latino community, typically they'll mix Spanish. However, we do see a lot of Spanish mixing that's occurring within all communities participating in Quebec rap. And then we have a very strong French-Canadian presence where mostly it would be French and English mixing. So what I study is the rules that govern this type of mixing and whether or not there's a specific grammar that belongs to the fact of mixing two different languages at once. Thanks so much.
That's a good point as well. And that's very interesting because we're living here in Quebec and we have multiple languages. And actually we have French and English almost at the same time. So I think that's a very interesting field to study. And I have a side question maybe for you, Emily, because you're working now with the rap scene here in Quebec. Do you have like a tip for us, which is a newcomer or what kind of music we should listen to or in terms of rap music?
Sure, of course, that's a fun question. I think that Quebec rap is actually an amazing learning tool for those who are learning French because there's a lot of French and English mixing. What you can do is listen to a Quebec rap music song and usually you'll understand the English, and if you're working on your French, you'll understand the theme and the topic that's being discussed, and so it can be easier to start learning some of the French vocabulary that way. I work with students in Quebec who are immigrants learning French, and they say that it's a wonderful way not only to realize that the Quebec French variety is very unique in terms of other Francophone varieties of French, but also to learn some of the slang, some of the curse words that appear in rap. So it's actually a very great tool for those learning French who maybe are only exposed to standard French in the classroom, so they can see the non-standard variations of French. Thanks, Christiana.
Yes, and do you have a tip, which is like a band or like a group we shall listen to?
Sure. I think there are a few fun ones that actually have received some attention in the media. There's a group called Dead Obies.
Maybe you can write it in the chat box.
Sure,
so we can
yeah.
follow it. That sounds really cool.
I'll just send a list. That'll be easiest.
Yes. So thank you so much for Tatiana, Emily, and Olivia for asking all the questions. Anyways, if you have any further questions or you would like to have the contact details of Olivia or Tatiana or Emily because you want to get in touch with them, please write it in the chat box. You can also stay longer after this event and you can have a direct discussion with the individuals per se. Okay. Thank you so much. Now we will continue with the next section and I will give my microphone over to Emily. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiana. So next we'll be moving on to the group of 3 participants whose projects are centered around fine arts, film, and computer-mediated design. So starting with Morteza Hasbe. Morteza is a PhD student at Concordia University. He completed his master's and bachelor's in architecture on designing cultural spaces. His interdisciplinary PhD research focuses on parametric design and optimization. He investigates how our rapidly developing computer tools are changing our building forms and the character of our cities and how computer tools can facilitate the optimization of culturally appropriate forms.
We all have experienced going to a beach, camping, an outdoor wedding, or a formal conference, a job interview at least once. Do you wear the same clothes for all of these occasions? Would you wear a black suit to a beach, or would you wear a sportswear to a formal job interview? Your answer is probably no. Many factors affect your clothes choices and style, such as the venue, the formality, often white, the weather, and often what everyone else plans to wear. This is one of the main ways we send social signals because what we wear shows our identity and personality. What about building? Do they wear clothes? Do they match their clothes to the surrounding? Are building form, shapes, and color important? Do these convey any meaning? Can we pick up a building in a small city in the East Europe and put it in a North American city? Your answer would be no again. It is clear that building such as human conveys social and cultural meaning, and they need to be compatible with their climate and setting. However, recent advancement in technology and digitalization in architecture poses the main following problems. First, you can see many simple glass box buildings all over the world, from Canada with a cold climate to Asia with a unique culture. This glass box building heralded a new type of international style, spectacular in form, but culturally inappropriate. Second, designing appropriate building forms that respond to the climate and cultural value at the same time is challenging. Our computer simulation tools are still so limited and only can assess a simple condition at a time and consider only limited environmental factors. Here is where my research comes into play. I look into how building can be designed to represent the cultural and contextual value and respond to environmental elements. To this end, I first deconstruct the meaning of the context into physical, social, cultural, historical, and environmental domains. Then, I assess how we can incorporate these qualitative and quantitative parameters into today's digital architecture. Conducting this research in Canada is important because digital and parametric architecture in Canada is trending. and reconciling technology and culture maintains our city's identity.
All right, so we'll go ahead with our next participant video. So I'm going to introduce Aristifanis Soulikias, who is a third-year INDI PhD student with a bachelor's in architecture from McGill University, an MA in building conservation from the University of York in the UK, and a BFA from Concordia's Mel Hoppenheim School of Cinema. His PhD research focuses on the juncture of architecture and film animation, and more specifically on ways with which artisanal animation techniques can help explore and reveal the urban built environment. His animated documentary, Last Dance on the Main, was selected at TIFF's Canada's Top 10 for the year 2014 and entered more than 65 festivals worldwide. Then in 2019, he won the prestigious JORGE Family Artist Residency to create an animated installation at the Museum of Modern Art in Salzburg, Austria.
For years now, I have been thinking, why have we accepted the increasing anonymity and disembodiment of our urban spaces? The disconnect from all the layers of materiality, the traces, the things we could easily measure ourselves against, the places in which we found community and meaning. Could it be about the way we conceive, design, communicate the built environment? The way we have been conditioned to see and perceive the city through computer-made images? Is this disconnect between bodies and buildings analogous to that of the hand from image making, drawing virtually rather than touching tactile media, moving spontaneously, making mistakes, discovering by touching, creating through hesitation and curiosity, feeling? Does the digitization of the way we express ourselves translate into our built surroundings? New research re-examines the virtues of artisanal techniques in film animation, as they are now facilitated by digital capture. The haptic is rediscovered in all of the visual arts, including animation and architecture, in both making and perceiving. If film is that temporal art closest to the city, and if haptic ways of creating and designing are being revisited, then I think it is time to look into how animation that incorporates the body can tell stories about the city, to make us see it anew, to make us feel it, and begin to recognize ourselves in it, the way we recognize our fingerprints on paper, charcoal, and clay. It is through my artistic practice that I am researching ways in which the body still has a place in the visualization process of the city, and by extension, in the urban space of today, that I'm exploring and gauging the possibilities and effectiveness of handmade animation in communicating aspects of space and place beyond the cerebral, beyond the virtual.
All right, so our third and final member of this second group is Jorge ZAVAGNO, who is an INDI Master's candidate whose research focuses on documentary filmmaking. His thesis titled, Can We Do the Right Thing? Documentary Filmmakers, is aimed at looking at ethical dilemmas in the process of making films and working with 360-degree and 3D video as an exploration tool.
Hello, my name is Jorge Savagno. I'm an INDI Master's student. My research focuses on documentary filmmaking and virtual reality. Documentary films can have a great effect on you. You would watch a film and it would expand your mind on a subject you may not have known anything about 90 minutes earlier. I would say that a film like Bowling for Columbine did that for me when I was in high school. I went on to go to Concordia University, study communications and film studies, and then went on to work in the documentary filmmaking industry for over 10 years. In those 10 years, I got to see how films are made, how many decisions have to be made, and how intricate and complicated they often are. I realized that a lot of those decisions didn't have a simple right or wrong answer to them. They had least bad and not as bad. That meant that there was a lot of ethical dilemmas that documentary filmmakers kept facing as they made the films. That inspired me to start this research. My research has two main questions to it. What are ways that documentary filmmakers make decisions in the process of creating films? And what are implementable tools for improving the resolution of ethical dilemmas in documentary filmmaking? I will now show you some of the virtual reality 360-degree video work that I have done so far in testing and looking at how I will present my research. I will explain what my 4 areas of inquiry are. Areas of inquiry: personal reflections, interviews, scholarly research, and workshops. Personal reflections will be used to explore my process of decision-making and how it motivates me in this research. Interviewing filmmakers explores the types of ethical dilemmas they face and how they approach them. Scholarly research structures my definition of ethical dilemmas and expands upon existing proposals of best practices. The final area of inquiry, the workshops, aims to develop a set of questions to better approach ethical dilemmas specific to documentary filmmaking. I will be using my 4 zones of inquiry to deconstruct the narrative structure of documentary film. These zones are made physical so that the viewer can be immersed in the showcase of my findings, something like theater in the round. I hope to present a clear understanding of how ethical decisions are made and be able to showcase the filmmaker's processes. I will also propose a set of questions that potential filmmakers can use to better navigate ethical dilemmas they will likely face in the filmmaking process. Thank you.
Christiane, you're on mute.
I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. So again, thank you to the filmmakers, and we have seen the second part of today's INDI Research exhibition. So again, it's time for the question part. If you have any question, what is coming to your mind regarding the film, the project, thesis project, or to the person itself, you can ask your question right now. For this, I would like to ask you to use the Q&A button and not the chat, if possible. Otherwise, you can also raise your hand, as mentioned earlier, and we will unmute you. Okay, thank you. So let me have a quick, oh yes, we have a lot of questions I see this time. Let's start with the first one. It's for Morteza. What are the factors that come into play when considering culture and context?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Christiana, for the question. So there are a lot of factors that came to the mind, because, like environmental factor, and also context factor, the site specific, and also historical factor. And then in my research, I try to divide them and deconstruct them and try to find what is the definition for them. And then it's really hard to define all of the factor, but because the culture is the concept, but in my research, I trying to deconstruct them, as I mentioned, history, the site, like the culture, and also maybe the physical thing, which might be a motif or pattern of the building. And then based on that definition, I will find a workflow to design a building based on the context.
Okay, great. Thank you, Morteza, for this. And
Yep.
actually, there was also another question for you, Morteza. What do you think? What do you think an optimal building design for a new performing arts center in Montreal would look like? So, what about like a new performing arts center, and how would it look like? So, what do you think? Do you have some suggestions about this?
That's really tough question. So it should represent the culture of the Quebec and culture of the Montreal. And at the same time, it should answer environmental factor, like in Quebec, we have a cold climate. It should have like answer climate factors, but it's really tough question. It's gonna be the end of the result of my research.
Yes, I had actually something similar in mind to ask you, what do you think about the current situation about Concordia University? Do you have like some a very good advice now for to reconstruct or to add maybe what is coming to your mind? Do you have something, or like regarding to experience?
So it should be, as I mentioned earlier, it should be like the combination between environmental factor, like the orientation of the building and how much we need to receive the sun in interior spaces. And then at the same time, it should be represent the Canada and the technology and the new trending of the technology in the North American city, and also the Quebec culture. It should be a combination between these three angles.
Thank you so much, Morteza.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So next I would like to ask Ari some questions. So the first question is regarding your background. Actually, you're an architect, right? So that's very interesting. And so the question is why you switched, or why do you switch like from being an architect to doing animations? Was it easy to do so, like to switch, or like to the transition to this new field?
Yes, making film well, thank you very much for this question, because it has beside my biographical information, it's actually very pertinent to the actual research I'm doing right now. Well, the easy part is that I always wanted to do film animation. It was a childhood dream, and as many of us, we choose sometimes a career that we think is more secure. And anyway, it was a long journey that all is, of course, enriching. Architecture is a very vast and broad field, so it was very enriching. And there's definitely ways of seeing the world and being trained to solve problems and of course, architecture has brought me to a journey where I really appreciated all of the layers of, let's say, like the history that I'm talking about in many of my films. So it has informed my work. Now, the switch was not easy because, as most of people who I know that are architects and study architecture, they do try to convince themselves every day that they love architecture. Some of them do, and I do too. But it's a it's really difficult to admit that you can move on a little further away from building, designing buildings. And for me, the main motivation was very close to what I'm trying to trying to research right now, which is about that intimate engagement with, of the creator with the creating, with what is created, with the end result. That is very distant in most architectural offices. The work, the designer in the architecture office, and the end result are very distanced. And I always felt that distance. I was never close to the end product. I was drawing lines on computers, never to be seen ever, never to see it translated to something. Now, this can happen in film animation too, but there are possibilities like these artisanal techniques where you see the result being made as you are making it. And that creative process is very satisfying, very gratifying. And I hope it has a link to the built environment and architecture still. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the answering this question. So there was a next question. It was in the chat box. I will read it loud. Can you say more about the range of ways you are thinking about in order to recenter the body in the design process?
Yes, so this course is not new. It's not something I'm bringing for the first time. I've done a lot of reading on haptic ways of design. Juhani Palasma is an architectural scholar, an architect from Finland, who has written extensively on the merits of bodily ways of drawing and design. Well, basically drawing by hand and making hand drawings have a certain merit in the way imagination is facilitated. And a lot of it is based on neurological studies, neuroscience. So it's not an opinion. Now, in my practice, so this has to do with drawing and architecture. There's also handmade animation and animating the built environment. This is not quite discussed, and that's where I'm trying to fill that gap. And in my case, just as handmade animation basically making these objects by hand, even though they're captured by a digital camera later on, the initial conceptual work, the drawing is made by hand, the whatever I do afterwards is made by hand before it's captured in camera. And even the motion of the objects that I'm moving are moved by hand on this light table, for example, where I'm working on. All this is perceived in the film. And it's also perceived in many other handmade animation films, especially clay animation, where you can see fingerprints. And there seems to be a certain appreciation about that presence of the body. And this is my way of positioning my body into my work, but it's very similar to some other similar techniques and similar to drawing by hand as architects do.
Great, thank you so much for answering this question. So now we are coming to Jose, and I have more questions for you. And the first question is, how do filmmakers agree upon a common set of ethics in filmmaking?
I think they don't. If you, what I'm finding out, if you're to talk to many different filmmakers, some will have very hard set rules that they will follow, and then they will look at another filmmaker and tell you that they believe that person is doing it completely wrong. So I think that's what makes it very interesting. The key is that there's journalistic set of ethics that exist, but that's for journalism, whereas documentary has a different place, and there's different kinds of documentary filmmakers. So I guess it's not a hard set rules for anybody.
Yes, I mean, there's currently a discussion in Germany about directed documentaries. So to use not like the normal people, the ordinary people, but instead to have like a script and to use like actors to facilitate the documentaries. Maybe this is also going into your direction, right? About ethics and what it's feasible or like what it's allowed to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, so many questions. There's some documentaries have scripts right before, and how much should you guide who you're interviewing? That's a big part. How much should you prep them? There's some filmmakers that are okay with guiding and pushing for certain responses, whereas others would find that to be ethical, like wrong to do. So there's a lot of discussion definitely happening on that.
That's true. Thank you for answering this question. And you saw there was a comment on your film in the chat box, which is very great, actually. Yes, it's like somebody loved your shots. Maybe you can read it by yourself. That's really great. in order to suggest the plurality of ethics to consider multiple vantages points, right? Can see it? Perfect. Thank you so much. So anyways, if you have further questions for Morteza, Ari, or Jose, please feel free to ask them. You can use the chat box. You can write personal messages as well to ask for contact details or more clarifications. You can do it now, and you can also do it during the entire display of videos. Otherwise, I will finish this question period and we will continue to the third and the last section of today. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiana. So the final section involves projects that are mostly focused on the life sciences, involving biological and chemical research. So first up, I'll be introducing Carolis Riad. So Carolis's thesis is titled New Materials for Stereolithography 3D Printing. So conducting his research under the supervision of Paula Wood-Adams, Suong Hoa, and Jerome Claverie, Carolis is working to make new materials for 3D printing that are both stable under sunlight and generally stronger than other existing materials.
Imagine this paperclip is the strongest material we know. Imagine this paperclip is made out of vibranium from Wakanda and I'm Black Panther trying to introduce you to my research world. Except I am researching the real world, and I'm using graphene sheets, not vibranium. Graphene is two-dimensional layers of carbon that is in fact the strongest material we know. It is stronger than diamond. But that strength exists only at the nanoscale. So my research question is essentially how can you translate the strength of the small paper clip into a large structure, such as the Golden Gate Bridge? The strength of the material we use is very important to our ability to use anything that we make. So I do that by trying to have as many of those graphene sheets as possible in my structures. I make space by orienting those sheets parallel to one another, then I connect them using light. Me using light allows me to do this process in a 3D printer. So in essence, my goal is to 3D print vibranium, graphene.
All right, so the next video we're going to see is from Christiana Meyer. So following a career as a pharmacist and researcher in anti-cancer drug development, Christiana is currently pursuing a PhD in the individualized program. Christiana's research investigates the adverse effects of chronodisruption, such as shift work and chronic jet lag, on the female endocrine system and emotional and reward-related behavior under the direction of the supervisor, Professor Shimon Amir.
The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is affecting us all in many different ways. Working from home during the pandemic has proven to be a lot more stressful than most of us imagined. And with more flexibility in working hours, more and more people are working at night. But working non-traditional working hours demands a tribute, as it messes up our inner body clock. You will feel tired, unconcentrated, and probably struggle to fall asleep at night. Indeed, if you live this extreme lifestyle over a longer period of time, you probably become sick. And moreover, there's a compelling evidence that women and men suffer differently from chronodisruption. Like all living organisms, we have an internal timing system in our body, composed of biological clocks. The main clock in our brain receives information about the time of day and communicates it to peripheral clocks located throughout our body. This systematic clock network ensures that fundamental body function associated with behavior and physiology happen at the right time of day. The female reproductive system is one purified target that requires a robust diurnal synchronization by the main clock for proper functioning, including the rhythmic generation and release of circulating steroids. In turn, steroids such as estradiol control the expression of genes involved in serotonin and dopamine neurotransmission in mood and reward-related brain regions. We hypothesized that the desynchronization of circadian rhythms dysregulates steroid levels in the female organism and increases the risk of suffering from mood disorder, anxiety, and substance abuse. To test our hypothesis, we are focusing on a female animal model exclusively. We investigate the physiological and molecular consequences and evaluate the incidence of mood disorder and abnormal alcohol consumption under chronodisruption. So far, our findings indicate that chronodisruption augments alcohol preference, increases anxiety and depressive-like behavior, and suspends the regular estrous cycle in female rats. Our results suggest a critical link between dysregulated gonadotropin and behavioral alterations. Our research will greatly contribute to the refinement of pharmacological and non-pharmacological treatments of mental health problems in females, focusing especially on the fine-tuned temporal interaction of circadian clock genes and their sex hormone signaling. As the COVID-19 pandemic is clearly changing our working habits, we should pay more attention to the time when we work, sleep, or when we eat, because timing matters and have long-term consequences in our health.
Wonderful. So last but not least, we'll see the video presented by FABIO BALLI. Fabio's thesis is entitled Ending Misery: How Thousands of People Can Put in Common Their Resources to Achieve Collective Wealth. His research question emerged after 5 years of travels, co-creation, and prototyping. Adopting a creation as research methodology has opened unique possibilities to reflect on Team Human, a great book by Douglas Rushkoff. Fabio would like to thank Margie Mendel, Warren Linz, Satoshi Ikeda, Philippe Cagnon, the Indie Friends, and les Québécois qui financent cette université. Here's his video.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, I hope you're well. My name is Fabio BALLI, and I'm interested in health, lawmaking, and group dynamics. I'd like to start with a proverb: an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Is it about eating healthily, or rather about nurturing our soul, learning about ourselves each and every day? In the last year, the government urged us to restrain our collective and individual freedoms, calling upon solidarity against a virus threatening our humanity, the coronavirus. But is it a biological or social virus? I've been exploring if top-down centralized decisions reinforce the ability of the population to take care of each other, or rather, if it prejudices, compromises the capacity to cope with uncertainty, to collectively create solutions that respect our local traditions and cultures. I found we have internalized common patterns from early childhood. At school, we had a few rules. First, we learned not through the group, but from a single master who may have all knowledge. Second, we are not moved by our intuition by belonging to the group. Rather, we sit, we should not move, we should control our sensation and deny our needs. Maybe the authority will take care of them. Later at work, competition has become the norm. We have learned that we have to fight against each other to get the permission to work. We deny that a minority can only get richer if a majority becomes poorer. Confronted with disease, we are not giving attention anymore to our sensation, to each other, to social proximity. Rather, we rely on technicians who learned by heart for years methods that apply to all, to everyone, regardless of culture context, or personal history. The body is not a machine that can be surveilled, that can be fixed piece by piece. Have we all become idiots, in the Greek sense, letting others decide for ourselves? What is health? Is it about repeating fear messages all day long? Or being creator of our own health, caring for each other, overcoming challenges with peers? And what is law? Is it a book written by experts that we have to comply to, or a way to collectively decide about the rules that guide the living together? I hope this inspires you to reflect on what constitutes our social body. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you also for the last part of the display of the videos. Now we have again the Q&A session, and again you can type your questions in the Q&A section down on the screen. If you have questions for the last group of participants. Otherwise, I see there's a question coming up in the Q&A box. Okay, that's for me. So then I will start. Okay, is the time strictly related to reproductive organs, and are people with uterus who are not reproductive experience the same issues? That's a very good question, I see. And the point is, no, it is not, because like actually there's a mutual interaction. So we know that the master clock in our brain is regulating our hormonal rhythms in the body. And so does also the female, but also the male steroids in our body. But there's also like a feedback loop, like from the steroids going back to our master clock. And that is true. And are people with the uterus who are not reproductive experience the same issues? So no, actually yes, because the system is the same. So we know that steroids are produced not only in the ovaries, but also in the brain. So there's like, we don't know actually how much dependent are the different sides of the steroid genesis is. But in the brain, there's de facto de novo synthesis of steroids, which is affecting brain regions related to reward and mood, and which can facilitate a higher risk for mood changes or like addictive behavior. So then I have a question for Kiro. So for what kind of things would you use your material, or for what kind of products? Or like if you think about the construction, you were mentioning the bridge. Beside this, for what would your material good or beneficial, good building material?
So it's meant to, I'm hearing some echoes. I don't know if my sound's coming across quite well, but essentially it's meant to improve the materials that's available in 3D printing. And with 3D printing, you can essentially make almost anything you want. The problem was stereolithography, which essentially is one kind of a 3D printing process that uses light. So you start with liquid glue, and then you pass a UV laser, and the material would become solid only in the area where the laser would trace. The problem is that once you have the same UV that exists in the 3D printing laser is also in sunlight, which is why I put sunscreen on the beach. And so the material, the part that you would make using this process would just break apart in a couple of months or a couple of weeks if you leave it outside. And so it's not stable, and it's not functional. And so you cannot make anything that's functional with 3D printing stereolithography, with stereolithography 3D printing. But my goal is to essentially allow it to be used in functional parts so that it has a longer term life, and that opens up applications. So I think at the beginning, if we're successful in making this kind of materials, then we'll see it being used in low stress applications. So for example, at the beginning of my research, I visited a 3D printing company in Montreal called Access Prototype. And they were saying that they have projects where these 3D print parts for the cockpit in an airplane. and they use metal 3D printing. And they said they would switch to stereolithography right away if there is stable material. But because there isn't, they have to use metal 3D printing, which is very expensive and very energy inefficient and so on. And same thing it goes with the strings. So once you have a stable material, if you make that material stronger, then you start to replace things that are made out of metal. Because it's lighter to use graphene, and it's lighter to use polymers. And so it becomes more energy efficient to use that process.
Yes, and there I have another question. What about the stability of your graphene over time, if you compare it to the traditional building materials?
Yeah, so it's almost like two distinct projects that I work on. So it's a stability problem with sunlight. This is essentially I have a project trying to solidify the glue using quantum dots and nanoparticles. And so that's one distinct project. And then I have the second distinct project with graphene, trying to make the material stronger. Eventually, at some point, those two projects have to combine to make a material that's both stable and strong. But for now, right now, it's going to be, if both projects succeed, then I have a strong material, but it's not super stable, or stable material that's not super strong. And then somehow we'll have to combine the learnings from both projects to actually come up with a perfect material.
That sounds very good, actually.
Yeah.
So over time, we can combine both of the projects, right? Sounds good. Thank you. And there was another question coming up. So how does your work on 3D printing is relating to your work on no waste? We know maybe that how does your work on 3D printing relates to your work on no waste? Because yes, on your campaign, right? So because you know that Kira is also the head, actually, right? I can say this. He's the head of this campaign. Maybe you saw this on Concordia. It's no waste, and he's also very active on social media, and so you can follow him. And yes, anyways, that's a side story. But how does your work from 3D printing is relating to this no waste campaign?
It's funny. So I lead Waste Not Whatnot at Concordia, which essentially tries to help the 50,000 member community at Concordia compost, sort, and reduce waste. And we started in 2016, and ever since, annual composting has doubled at Concordia, and overall waste has decreased by 16%. By overall waste, I'm talking about recycling plus composting plus landfill. So everything is being generated on campus. It has absolutely nothing to do with my research. It's a project that started after I got interested in 3D printing and materials. So I started my work on 3D printing in 2012. It was 4 years before I started Waste Not, and I'm quite new to sustainability. It's something that I've grown to become a lot more passionate about more recently. But there are also implications on the climate crisis when it comes to 3D printing, because 3D printing allows you to make very complicated design, very energy efficient designs, which are going to be very difficult to do with conventional machining. And so because 3D printing allows for those energy efficient designs, and that allows you to use less fossil fuels and emit less greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Kira, for this question. There was also something coming up in the chat. Maybe you had a look at this. So there's somebody who's interested in your research work, and finally the question is, what is known about sheet orientation regarding the strength, and do you investigate this as well?
Yeah, so essentially the goal for my graphene work is to have them orient parallel to one another. So graphene is two-dimensional sheets of carbon, and essentially the goal is, how do you translate the strengths of the graphene at the nanoscale to a large structure? And the way to do this is you want to have as many graphene sheets as possible in a given space. And the only way to do that is by having them orient parallel to one another. So think of paper clips on a box. If you put a couple of paper clips on a box, you'll all be randomly oriented. But if you keep adding paper clips, at some point you cannot add anymore unless those paper clips are parallel to one another, because then you have more space. And so this is the relationship between orientation and strengths, is that they allow for more space to have more graphene sheets. And essentially you can think also of a wall, of a brick wall. the wall is not necessarily as strong as the brick, but you want all the bricks next to each other, parallel to another, and then you bond them together with cement. And that way you have a stronger stronger wall, not necessarily as strong as a brick, but you have a bigger structure. Sorry, I talked too much.
No, that totally makes sense. And thank you for answering this question in more detail. It's perfect. Thank you so much, Kirill. Yes, and then there was a question for me. It's regarding, I will read the question as well. Is there a certain age range when females are more susceptible to chronodisruption and its effects, particularly on their mental health? That's a very great question, actually. And it's coming back actually to the females. We know we are going through different developmental stages. And so we have the puberty, and then we also we have the menopause. And during this phases, we have a huge, just simply say, it's like hormonal changes. And during this phase, we know from research that there's a higher risk for women to develop or higher rate of progression towards mental disorders. That means like becoming more anxious or like showing depressive-like behavior. This is accounting only in terms of mental health issues. Okay, that's from my side. Then I will switch over to Fabio. Fabio, also for you, we have a question. And the question is, let me see, how much has your project actually changed since the pandemic? Right, you started before the pandemic with your PhD project. And what do you realize on the pandemic? What was like good, or maybe what was not so good, the limitations, and how was your project, or like how it has changed at this time?
I'd say there's a lot of echo. Is it better now? Okay, so my focus on my research was really about commons and how we can put together resources. And early at the pandemic, I had the chance to have two new activities coming. One was to co-host a European hackathon to fight against COVID, and the other was to write a report about open science. And what I found first in the hackathon was we were a lot of people coming together. In Europe, for example, we had 20,000 coming together for 3 days. And if we count that in an equivalent of people working full-time, it would equal 1,500 people working full-time during 1 year. So it was a huge amount of people willing to contribute voluntarily, to work together. Unfortunately, the problem was that the hackathon was about competing. It was the common model we know about competition, about creating a startup, each doing his own thing and not connecting to the others. Then I found, okay, but if these 1,500 people would come together and agree on a minimal number of projects that would be open source, that could be reproduced in all the countries, then we would be able to change really fast the habits and act to transform or to address the challenges we have. With the other report on open science, I felt I became more aware about the dogmatism that exists in science. As for now, especially I find in Quebec, there is a really the prime minister coming every day and saying, oh, you have to follow that and follow that. And the autonomy of people to create their own solution, to think differently, to say maybe there are other solutions that taking a vaccine, maybe I can go with art therapy, maybe I can meet with friends and discuss what we want to do together and how we want to cope with that and how much risk we want to take. I feel that would be much more empowering for people. So that's what came into my research in the last year. Yeah.
So thank you for answering this question. Yes, and there's another question about your thesis title. It is Ending Misery, How Thousands of People Can Put in Commons Their Resources to Achieve Collective Wealth. So the question is why you choose thousands of people Is this like, could it be also 100? Could it be like more than thousands? Why this number of people? Is there meaning behind it?
You know that there is like, we are all like feeling these CAPTCHA chains when we want to enter websites to validate that we are not a robot. And we spend, or we give for free thousands of hours every day for such things that are not really helping the humanity, I'd say. Of course, it can help like correct some books that are scanned, but it's not helping us move forward and become more aware and more solidar. So I feel the number is really enabling us to have a high impact. And if even, I don't know, if even like half of Concordia would meet and say, okay, let's come for 3 days together. We all agree to do non-commercial, non-patented projects. And we do a minimal number of projects, not 10 times the same. Then we would have a real lever to change society. And that's why I put thousands, because I feel we are now building thousands of ivory towers, whereas we could together build like a cathedral or something that really also helps people in other countries where they don't have the resources we have.
That's true. That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you for answering this question. Thank you so much. So now we will finish the Q&A session at this point, and we watched all the videos. So now my work is done. I will give my part over to Rachel, and she will moderate the last part of today's exhibition. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. And thank you to Emily and to Christiane for moderating so well, and to Darlene for helping out as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to vote. So we have 3 prizes to announce. We're going to take a little bit of break before we get to the prizes, but during the break, I would like you to vote. We're going to ask Douglas and Anna to throw up the question. It'll be just done as the usual Zoom poll for your favorite video of the day, and you'll have the precise language over there. I also want to take this opportunity before we go to a break to do some thanking of people. The first people I have to thank are Anna and Douglas, who've just been absolutely amazing, both in helping us to organize the event through ForSpace, but also for all of us throughout the pandemic. They've kept the cultural life of Concordia going, and they do an immense amount of work really to keep us all in conversation and to keep our research robust and dynamic and connected. And so a huge, huge thank you to Anna and to Doug behind the scenes. I also want to thank the students. This is the first year that INDI Research Day has been just basically run by the students, organized, prepared. You've done an amazing job. It's so fun and dynamic. And I hope, as we go forward, we'll get to meet more in public and together, but this has just been incredible. I have so much admiration for all the work you've done during a very difficult year. And I want to thank the judges again. We'll get to them a little bit later. But of course, at INDI, who's the most important person on the program? We all know that it's Darlene Dubiel, who's our rock, who keeps everything together, who helps out in every way possible and gives us all really every kind of support you could possibly imagine. So let's turn on our cameras and let's give each other all a huge round of applause. There we go. And thank everyone who's been involved with this wonderful day. So I can see the polls popped up at my computer. If you can't see it, you might have to sort of click around on your windows to make sure that it comes up, or you can click the polling button at the bottom of your screen. It's 4:18. We're going to just take a couple of minutes to have a bit of a breather, and then we'll be back after the break to announce the winners. So we'll see you in a bit.
Yes, I would like to fill in the space. There was a question, somebody was raising the hand in between. Maybe we can also use this part if someone would like to ask something in more details now. There was a question from Francesca. Is it still?
Is it still there?
I don't know. No, she put it down. Okay, she lowered her hand, so I think the question is solved. Anyways, Francesca, if you would like to ask.
Hi, sorry, no, that's okay. It was
okay. Okay. Hi.
Jorge, there's actually, if you're still around, there's a question that was asked of you that didn't get to come into our conversation. So if you're still around, maybe turn on your video and we can have a little bit more of a chat about ethics. maybe Jorge's taking a break. That's cool.
I think it was my question.
Oh yeah, it could be. That's okay.
I'm not going to speak for Jorge, but could you repeat your question? Because it's something that touches upon VR, so maybe it's something to...
I think the question that I had was what examples of common ethical dilemma that are faced by documentary filmmakers.
So that's not, I can't help with that, sorry.
Sorry, maybe it's a different question that Rachel was referring to. Just that.
That question I can answer it, and just because it was I'll give you a classic one or an easy one, which is funding, how films are funded and who you're getting your money from to fund the projects. That's one that if you go private, or there's documentaries that have been funded by corporations. So then it gets very interesting on what you can and can't say and who decides how the story should be told. So that's thanks for the question.
I was always curious about how much editorializing. I'm Egyptian. My pronunciation is not always perfect. Yeah, I was always wondering how much of that ends up happening, and the kind of ethical decisions that have to take place, because I imagine it's necessary most of the time, just for brevity.
Yeah, and sometimes who's presenting it, if a television channel will put on they'll have notes of what they don't want shown on their network.
Yeah.
So then it gets a bit of a fight or a bit of a discussion of how you tell the story. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I can just jump in here.
Yeah, sure.
I was just going to say, I think that funding and ethics is a very interdisciplinary question. If I can just give a quick example from my own research in linguistics, funding really influences the productions here in Quebec because there's a lot of governmental and especially provincial funding available. Just a quick foray into rap music is there are a lot of rap artists here who are making claims and wanting to use their own proper language that is often against these linguistic expectations that are necessary for the funding. So you will hear rappers talking about 70% Francophone, because at one point this was one of the standards for their music, that if they wanted to receive funding from the province of Quebec, they had to have the majority of their lyrics be in French, which is also something that contributed to the phenomenon of code switching between English and French.
Yeah, but I think it's like something what everyone experiences in his own field of research, right? So when I'm thinking back to my pharmaceutical background, it is like what, the money goes there, what the pharmaceutical industry is supporting, but sometimes also the government is supporting. So, and there we see the fields are emerging, or there's new research fields are coming up, and other ones are more supported than the other ones. It also depends strongly now. We have the COVID situation, so the research to provide new drugs to treat COVID-19 pandemic or to develop new vaccine, it's strongly pushed, right? Whereas other field of research in terms of drug development is neglected somehow right now. So it's really hard, it's like every time we have a trend and towards where the money is going, and then there'll be change after a while. So, but the point is we need to maybe look at the balance, not to go in the wrong direction. And I think sometimes it's also good to have a trend towards one research area and then going after a couple of years, going over to another research area. Might be also beneficial.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I think that everybody's probably back from their break, and it's time to announce the winners. So again, huge thanks to our judges, MJ Thompson from Fine Arts, Kathleen Boyce from JMSB, and Peter Pawlik from from SGS. And I'm going to ask Peter to announce the winners.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And I think, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, good. I think I speak on behalf of all the judges when I say that we had a really enjoyable yet really challenging job in judging all these entries because all the videos were outstanding. But after much deliberation, we did narrow it down to our first place and second place winners. And so I'll start with the second place winner, and that is Tatiana Zanon, Diversity and Othering in Science, a comparative study between Brazilian and Canadian textbooks. So congratulations, Tatiana.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. And first place goes to Aristophanes Soulikias, Handmade Animation and the City. So congratulations, Aristophanes.
Thanks, Peter. And for our popular choice, the winner this year is Christiane Meyer, whose project is called Listen to Your Body's Clock and Why the Female Gender Matters. Congratulations, Christiane. Great. Well, thanks so much. So let's keep this conversation going. It's such a rare treat to get so many different kinds of thinkers and scholars in a room together. So yeah, where did we leave off? Ethics. I think it's something that probably affects all of us in our different fields differently. As a historian, it certainly comes into play in terms of the things I think I can say and the things I know I shouldn't, and also the way in which I balance one voice over another, which are different from the concerns that you all have about funding or about, having to be accountable to different groups of the people. Maybe that's what we're really talking about with the ethics, right? Is we're really talking about accountability to the different people whose stories we're telling or the different people we're trying to please or serve with our research. Yeah. Fabio, I actually had a bit of a question for you, because what really struck me about your work is that you're kind of establishing a really useful difference between health and wellness, right? And the way that you're thinking about food is something that serves our bodies, but also serves our soul. So I wonder if you could talk about some of the different ideologies around health and the body that inform your research.
Yes, I feel I could just refer to one article that I really like from Trish Krenlak. She's a well-known UK author, and she wrote something, if I can find it, it was published in the BMG, Beyond Patient Disease, I suppose, Chronic Illness Beyond the Expert Patient, where she provides a table of 4 different ways to look at medicine and health. And the first one is really about self-management. So you are just coping with your own challenges. Second level is coping with illness. So then you go to the doctor and you are more like following or complying with what they are saying. Or then you have a whole system approach, which is already more a bit holistic, where you have to get engaged. Maybe you can contribute to your treatment, you can work with peers, you can develop your own approaches. And the fourth stage, which I found the most interesting, is critical public health, where the reflection is more about thinking critically at the institution and the government as potential oppressors, with reference to Foucault, for example, or other actors. And I feel that's something, now I'm in Europe, and I'm really sad to see that Canada is so, for me, becoming very top-down in the decision-making. It's really bringing out the police and not so much education. And I feel like, for example, in Switzerland, in the constitution, it's written you cannot get medication if you don't want to. It's really a question of freedom of choices. And in Canada, I heard there are lots of messages about, oh, everyone will get vaccinated, and etc. And it's not so much about empowering people. So I'm not sure if I'm answering you, but
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted, if I may, I don't know. One thing I wanted to jump in that funding conversation. I think there's a lot to be said. If, for example, in scientific publications, we're always required to disclose our funding sources and so on because of the different implications. But there's also the ways as scientists that we're not living up to the responsibilities we have to where our funding comes from. So a lot of scientific research is funded by government, but the taxpayers don't really have access to the research publications that we put out there is always behind paywalls, and the tax funding is that taxpayers who paid for that research cannot read it. So I think this is a really big problem that we really have to try to address in terms of our ethical obligations to the people who are paying us. It's also an interesting, I got to experience the challenging dilemmas of funding also through my work at WasteNot, where, you know, funding comes to our project and then people have certain expectations, which is always how I got in trouble because I don't react very well to being told what to do. But I think it's also one thing that environmental groups and sustainability groups have to grapple with, because we get funding from all kinds of organizations and they have certain expectations, and we have to find ways to remain credible and protect that credibility, because without it, we cannot make any impact.
I would maybe want to ask one of our artists to take up that same question, right? Because I think there's a sense that in the fine arts, these questions of accountability and credibility, especially with funding, are less straightforward, right? My understanding would be that there'd be more sort of subjective interpretation of those sorts of relationships. So how do you think about sort of credibility, maybe Olivia and Ari, and accountability in relation to, I don't know, audience or funding bodies, or those sort of communities and people you're serving with the work that you do? And Jorge, you too. I mean, you really sort of straddle the line.
Well, probably I have the least to say, so I'll start. I don't know if you're okay with that. Yes, it has always been a delicate issue how to represent whatever I'm showing, especially when I did I did my documentary, Last Dance on the Main. It was always, you know, a delicate line where I had to, I had voices, I had other people speak and tell their story, and I had to mediate it. But then I was always trying to keep a distance and not represent them to the extent that they would be misrepresented. So there was a bit of the level of abstraction always was a part of, you know, keeping that delicate balance, especially with environments which I was not as familiar with. And of course, you know, inviting the artists after to see the film and all that was also important for me, for that process, for when I see the artists, the people that I represented in that film, so that they can feel that they are part of the creative process as well, and also have their consent in a way. As funding is concerned, as my research is and also I think COVID hasn't helped, as my research has centered more around me and the way I make things, that connection with community has been lost a little bit. But it's an important question for future representations of community and the funding. We always try to gear sometimes our research or our topics and align them with trends, but I don't want to, I don't know if that's too romantic, but I don't want to be too preoccupied by that. I would like to be free and try to do what I want and hope to find some alignment with the available funding.
Olivia, what about you? Because your work really takes up this idea of sort of the subject and the subject both that you're discussing, but also your own subjectivity, right? You're so careful to think about the power relationships, both in terms of your identity and the identity of those in the places you study. So how does that work in your art?
Oh yeah, hi, and congrats everyone. This is an interesting conversation to have, you know, in this moment. I think I'll answer more from less from the research side, but more from like practicing artist side. I think there are many ways you could look at the question, which I think you're more asking, you know, where does that line of who decides who gets money for what art projects? That's what I was hearing in your question initially. I think that's a great question. I mean, one could think about the level of subjectivity which is inherent to art, you know, as a starting point. But ultimately, I think, you know, that could be said for most fields. There's many ways I could answer. I think ultimately, when you move around, and that's my case, I've become aware of how subjective your own take on this question is. So if I'm functioning here and I chose to come here, even though I haven't become a resident of this country yet, which by default means, you know, a different level of access to a lot of major funding streams, which I'm aware, you know, are something I could go into further when I decide to do that. However, that being said, in the Caribbean, there's very, very little funding or no funding whatsoever for the arts. I mean, there is some funding, but it's incredibly limited. And so therefore, it changes the dynamic completely. And thinking about it that way, the same way also that Fabio highlighted the difference now in this COVID era of how we relate to what we're able to do or not do. So I think probably in Canada, there are some incredible opportunities for fine artists, visual artists, those working whether in one discipline or across a couple of disciplines. I think arts have been understood in very interesting ways from funding bodies, from my understanding, both regionally and provincially, provincially and federally. The federal funding agencies have opened up a large amount of funds recently to encourage projects that hire lots of people. Quite literally, that's one of the motivations, is that someone with a big project can create something in which more artists or creatives or technicians will be hired. That's right now. And so I think that's, you know, that's an interesting shift. There is a less, compared to the USA, there's a lot less philanthropy. So it's not so common for younger artists, emerging artists to think about selling their work as part of their way to get by, eventually earn a living. And I think fundamentally, especially in the last year, I've been thinking about a lot more realistic ways to continue functioning as both an artist and a researcher. And a lot of people do want to buy your work. And that is part of what you do as an artist. It depends what kind of work you do and who you want to sell it to. And I think that's a huge ethical question, of course, but I think maybe the less lively conversation around the art market isn't always helpful to younger artists. I know that in the last few years, it has increased, and there's some interesting initiatives in Montreal and Quebec and Canada. But that's, again, that's not in the research at the university that it can really, you know, that's with my artist hat, I'll answer. And I think otherwise, I think everyone here is doing something that crosses several disciplines. So it becomes a challenge and you don't fit in the box. So you have to prove that what you're doing is unique and interesting and relevant to all the different people. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we all need to find better ways to support this type of research wherever it's coming from, because that's what a lot of people say they want to fund, but it's not always straightforward to fund it in a way that you can take all the right, you know, this is what should come out of it, because often, especially with art practice, it's not so clear. But yeah, anyway, I hope I've answered something useful. There you go.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, let's open it up. Did you all have questions for each other?
Yes, I have a question because this was coming up from Olivia. I really liked her with how she explained it very well. But you know what, like, was coming up in my brain was the balance, to keep the balance, to be like an artist and a researcher. So my question is it hard for you? Because we have many artists in our program. Is it hard for you to be both at the same time, to use this creativity to develop something and to be creative? But on the other hand, you need to be very rational. You need to think, you know, you need to have a strategy. Is it sometimes hard to keep the balance?
I think Ari or anyone here actually could answer, but I'll just jump in. Thanks, Christiane. I think it would be probably the same. I mean, again, the notion of artist has definitely evolved. And I think Quebec, what brought me to Quebec, to Concordia, to Canada, was that it was okay to work with technology first and foremost. It's not where I started exactly, but that isn't always the case in different spaces and different cultural realities. So once you've found what makes you an artist, I think you can make incredible things happen. I'm still finding that I don't have the perfect balance whatsoever. I've been really engaged in thinking deeply and researching, but not publishing anywhere near as much as I thought I would. However, I've continued to exhibit internationally. I mean, it's a choice. I think I could have done it differently, but I think for all those people that I speak to, because regularly now I get asked to help advise, what do you think? I'm an artist. Should I, apply to the INDI program? So multiple times now I've been in a position of like, oh, how would I best advise you, me 4 years ago versus me today? And I think maybe it's something, I don't know if any of you have had this experience where someone is coming to you or emailing you and how do I best advise? I think ultimately for any situation where you're looking at something that, doesn't fit the same strategy, like I have an art project in mind, and Ari, please correct me, but, or, add to this, you have a deliverable in your head, or it's a commission, or it's an exhibition, or it's a film or animation, and what you do along the way, you'll get the support, you'll get the resources, and it will happen. And it does take a bit of code switching, to quote Emily's research, or to link back to that, to get the words right. But I think that's precisely what I feel the INDI program is teaching me. I mean, that's really the essence of, you can do this, you just have to find the way that it works for you. Yeah, I think I could definitely propose many suggestions for the enhancement of all the different things artists do to be included in more of the administrative nooks and crannies. Of course, I'm sure other people have thought of this. And equally for designers or other folks coming into academia. But I guess all of us could add to the list of, the great way someone like, Darlene is incredibly able to, I don't know how you do it, Darlene, manage all our insecurities in bringing our load of questions and baggage to the same program. And that's what I've appreciated the most, is that we each come to it and we have our own set of challenges. And so art is only one of those many disciplines, but for sure, you get a lot of exposure as an artist when you're exhibiting. So then it looks like, you know what you're doing, but not always. Sorry.
I think you can do it. You just have to figure out the way that works for you, should be our slogan, because that is truly what the program is about. Just facilitating brilliant, innovative, create sometimes super bonkers new research that you just simply can't do in ways that are conventional or traditional. Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking it's likely time to wrap up and put an end to what's been a wonderful day. It's been so much fun, and I feel like I got to really sit with your research in a way that I usually don't, when we're kind of walking around and seeing who's there and trying to figure out how to keep people from sampling, whichever food studies person is putting up their food that day, and all those kinds of fun things that we do when we're in person. And of course, we all miss each other and hope that next year we can be in person, but this has just been absolutely fantastic. And I want to commend everybody on your wonderful work, especially the JISA committee, you've just been fantastic at, at plowing through and making everything possible. So huge round of applause to all of you. And again, thanks to Fourth Space, thanks to Darlene, thanks for all of our great attendees, and to our judges. It's been just a wonderful afternoon, and I wish you a wonderful end of term and hopefully a summer where you get to spend time with your people in person and some time outdoors and all that.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Rachel. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for the shout out. Congratulations to all. A lot of energy went into this on your side, so we really appreciate you sharing your work with us in this way and being open to expanding the conversation a little bit. Okay, folks, we're going to close up the webinar. Go play in the snow or whatever we do at this point. Thanks again for your time and energy. We hope that you continue supporting student research and projects by showing up to 3MT tomorrow. Should be a fun time at 2 p.m., the 3-minute thesis competition. And this was a good, like, almost equivalent practice round for that. Anyhoodle, on that note, thanks everybody. I remind you there will be a recording of this up on our YouTube. Just look up Concordia University Sports Space and you'll find us there. On that note, we're closing up. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
I guess we'll have to jump off the meeting soon, but
I think
great job, everyone. That was really, really great.
yes, I think we have still 3 attendants.
Yeah.
Attending.